First impressions matter a lot, so it's little surprise that the overwhelming majority of video games ease players into the experience. But sadly, not all games are quite so charitable. Some games dare to dispense with the pleasantries and just throw players out of the frying pan and into the fire immediately. These 10 games all dared to present players with a colossal challenge right out of the gate, serving as an immediate skill check before they even knew if they were actually any good at the game at all. I'm Jess for WhatCulture, let's talk ultra-hard video game opening levels. Number 10, Stage 1, Back to the Future Part 3. Even for the standards of video game adaptations of classic movies, Back to the Future Part 3 sure is bad. And yet it doesn't even have the decency to be a blandly inoffensive cash-in. The first stage, in which you play Doc Brown as he rides a horse to try and rescue his lover Clara, is a maddeningly infuriating obstacle course requiring pin-sharp reflexes. Players are required to shoot incoming birds and projectiles, jump over crevices and barrels, with such aggravatingly small reaction windows that you're better off just resorting to rote memorization of the path through the level. Though a successful run through the stage only lasts a minute or so, it's much easier said than done. Number 9, Prologue, Nier Automata. Nier Automata offers up one of the most unexpectedly challenging prologue sequences in recent video game history, in large part because there's no way to save until you've made it all the way to the bunker section. There's at least 40 minutes of gameplay, including some infuriatingly unskippable cutscenes. Even on normal difficulty, the prologue is surprisingly demanding, and if you're nutty enough to try it on hard, you're in for a painful night. You need to fight not one but 2 tricky bosses before getting to the end, ensuring that the opening serves as less of a calm tutorial than a demented trial by fire. While the rest of the game is hardly a picnic in and of itself, it's at least more fairly balanced, and the ability to save isn't cruelly gated off from you. Number 8, Temple of Trials, Fallout 2. Fallout 2's opening tutorial sequence is the bane of many players' time with the otherwise terrific RPG, a deeply lazy labyrinth of tests designed to check players' mettle before they start the game proper. You'll need to fend off giant ants and rad scorpions with a pathetic spear, pick locks, and if you want the easiest route to freedom, talk your way out of combat with a human opponent. The biggest issue is that it assumes you played the first Fallout, and so if you're new to the franchise and start the tutorial with the wrong build, that is, one not terribly suited to handling explosives or talking smooth, you're basically screwed. It might be a fair assessment to say that the Temple of Trials is more soul-drainingly dull than it is truly ball-bustingly difficult, but it's basically a textbook example of how not to bring players up to speed. Number 7, The Underworld 1-1, Kid Icarus. The interesting thing about the original 1986 Kid Icarus game is that it actually kicks off with its hardest level, and so if you're able to slug it out through stage 1-1, the rest of the game is a whole lot more manageable. But getting through that opening level, which rather aptly takes place in the Underworld, is so much easier said than done, given that you start out with only minimal health, items, and attack range for your arrows. Dying will send you all the way back to the beginning of the level, which requires around 5 mistake-free minutes of play to surpass. Again, the plus side of this is that it's by far the fiercest challenge the entire game has to offer, and with the steady stream of upgrades throughout the remaining levels, each subsequent stage basically becomes easier than the next. Number 6, Welcome to the Revolution, Deus Ex Human Revolution. Somewhat like Fallout 2, it isn't so much that Deus Ex Human Revolution opens with the most migraine-inducingly difficult sequence in pure gameplay terms, but simply that it has no regard whatsoever for how many players actually like to play the Deus Ex games. Before you're able to get your stealth on, Human Revolution's opening level forces you into a shoot-'em-up scenario against a fleet of masked, heavily armed goons, sans augmentations no less. Given that a high number of Deus Ex players will avoid combat wherever possible, and leaving cover at any point is pretty much a one-way ticket to the morgue, many of them struggled to make it to the end of the prologue. Number 5, The Graveyard, Ghosts and Goblins. Ghosts and Goblins is generally accepted to be one of the most punishing video games of its era, and the torment begins with the opening graveyard level, where players are thrown directly into the fray as hapless knight Sir Arthur. In addition to being a sluggish and unresponsive protagonist, Arthur can only take 2 hits before dying. Adding to the humiliation, he'll be reduced to running around in his underwear after taking the first hit. Making matters worse is the sheer number of enemies hurled at you. The zombies can spawn literally underneath your feet and cause an easy game over if you're not careful. It's nothing if not a statement of intent for the rest of the game. Number 4, the tutorial, Driver. As much as Driver may be one of the most iconic and memorable racing games on the PS1, how many of us actually ever made it past that ridiculous tutorial level? The game begins with an ineptly designed driving test intended to ensure players are familiar with its vehicular mechanics, by forcing them to complete a list of maneuvers with an unforgiving time limit. The big issue is that developers seemingly never factored in that young children playing wouldn't know what the terms burnout and especially slalom mean. The result is a level which proved more difficult and sucked more time away from players than any other in the game until the final one. Number 3, USA, Double Dragon 3, The Sacred Stones. USA doesn't suffer fools, or really anyone, lightly. Though the stage is plenty difficult on its own dubious merits, what really compounds this is the fact you've only got a single life, and there aren't any continues available until you reach the 4th of the game's 5 stages. Though the original Double Dragon trilogy is very much defined by its difficulty, the 3rd game's opening stage is on a whole other level of abuse entirely. Number 2, Boletarian Palace, Demon's Souls. You could probably pick any From Software game to join this list, but Demon's Souls is an especially interesting case, given that it's just received a glossy remake for PS5. A remake that's shed none of the 2009's original shellacking level of challenge. Once you get through the brief forlorn outpost tutorial, Demon's Souls' one level is the Boletarian Palace. It's incredibly easy to get caught short in the level's tight passages and corridors, where just a quick few hits are enough to get killed. And while the difficulty of this area and its boss, the Dragon Phalanx, pale in comparison to the game's grandest challenges, by the reasonable difficulty metrics of most games, the palace is an absolute nightmare. Number 1, Imperial Dungeons, The Elder Scrolls Arena. And finally, we have the first entry into the beloved Elder Scrolls series, 1994's The Elder Scrolls Arena. Though widely lauded by critics and fans alike upon release, the game also proved infamous for its opening level, in which players must escape from the Imperial dungeons by hook or by crook. Doing so is an endurance trial for players as they attempt to navigate their way out while being constantly waylaid by enemies. And so, as much as the game encourages you to explore the dungeon for loot, nobody could blame you for seeking the fastest path out of there. Hell, even Ken Rolston, the lead designer of the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, once said in a 2007 interview that in 20 attempts he only made it out of the first dungeon once. That says it all, really. Let me know if there's any ultra tricky opening levels that we missed down in that comment section. Let me know which one of these is your favorite/least favorite. I've been Jess for WhatCulture, and stay tuned for even more content.